These are the post-mortem interviews. Welcome to the post-mortem interviews. I'm Trevor, the disgruntled PM. Today's episode is a bonus episode with some clips from various interviews already recorded and live on the Patreon page of the post-mortem interviews. This is where I dive deeper into the expertise of my guests. I ask them pointed questions to get real answers, to give you actionable tips and insights and information to not only make you a better project manager, but a better leader, a better professional, a better human being. There is very little in terms of actual additional interview. These are questions directed at my guests based off their expertise to really bring out what it is that they know, what it is that they do, and really just add value, because I really do believe that every one of my guests is somebody important. They add value, they have expertise. And in a normal interview, it's kind of hard to get some of that out of them. But when you go into the postmortem interviews with the bonus content, that's where you're going to get about 20 minutes of extra content for $5 a month. And every guest records an episode, and every guest gives you actionable information. So enjoy the clips, and I hope you subscribe, because I'm excited to bring these out, and I have one for every single guest that I have on the show. You know, you and I have had a lot of candid conversations about things, and I know in real estate investment, risk appetite is a huge thing, because you can pick the cliche, no risk, no reward, but also with a big risk, there could be big reward, but there could also be huge downside.
Absolutely. Risk identification, risk mitigation. It's very hard to quantify certain elements of that, right? And so there's a lot. You can always apply a number to something, whether it's tethered to reality or not. Who knows? But it's it is a scary business to make multi-million-dollar decisions with limited information, and so you really have to become, pretty attuned to, I don't want to say your gut, but just some more instinctual elements when you don't have quantitative information in front of you, more qualitative assumptions. And it's tough. And it's all across the board. It's in the assets we buy. It's in the vendors we employ. It's in the assumptions we make. I can tell you, as a great example, right? Since 2022, when interest rates started increasing, like nobody in the commercial real estate world, let alone the greater economy, had any idea that the federal funds rate would go up to 5.5%. It was just not in the cards. It was not in any economist predictions, nothing. And it seized our entire industry up for a while, where investment volume plummeted by more than 80%, as people kind of tried to figure out where the bottom was and what it is. And that's where it comes back to what is quantifiable risk and what is non-quantifiable risk. For us as real estate investors, one of the things that the way we try to mitigate risk at the highest level is, if we buy something, does it make sense today, right? And so that is where a lot of investing can get very risk heavy, because the more you speculate, the more you're introducing more variables and more things out of your control into the equation. And that's not real estate investing, that's investing in general, right? You're going to go buy some options on a company because you think the stock price might go up. You don't have any direct impact on whether that stock goes up or down. You might have a hunch, you might have some intuition, but unless you're doing insider trading, because you have inside information, you're making a bet. It might be an educated bet, but it's still a bet, right? And so, with real estate, the way we couch that is, we're like, okay, does this yield on this property make sense today? I have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring, but does it at least make sense today? And that is a good way, I think, for a lot of people to think more intelligently about risk within my field. Now, risk within the general realm of project management, it's all across the board because you have so many different stakeholders, so many different variables, so many different outputs. It's not just about getting your project to the finish line. It's about having it be on budget. It's about having everybody buy into the end result. And, I think a lot of things that are not nearly as binary as some of the risk elements of real estate.
Yeah, and you hit on a couple of really good points there with the assumptions and projection because I I'll be the first to admit I'm guilty of this more than anyone is you make an assumption and then you go down the either the parade of horribles of why it's a horrible idea and you go downstream real quick in the
Yep. Yeah.
spiral of everything going wrong and then all of a sudden, you know, before you know it because I made this one choice, my wife is leaving me, my kids are gone, the dog ran away, all those things when in reality what happens if that risk actually comes to fruition? You pay a little bit more money to make the problem go away.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but you're right though. There is this compounding effect of both good and bad decisions, right? And this is part of what we do uh in our sensitivity analysis to our different investments, right? Like we show a range of outcomes depending on a range of variables. And so to your point, it shows it when it goes up, and if each thing goes up the right way, it builds off of the other ones, right? So you have this compounding growth or compounding declining effect. So it's either the best investment you've ever seen or it's complete dog crap. And in reality, there are so many different mitigating elements along the way that the likelihood of it being either one of those is de minimis.
So there was an organization I worked with, and they had a bunch of different departments that were independent, but they co-worked, if that makes sense. So though they were independent departments, they all
Cross-functional teams.
yeah, cross-functional. And there was one in particular that the bosses saw this guy as the greatest thing to happen to that particular department. And I actually had to turn them around and show them that that person was actually costing the department money. And they were like, "Well, I don't understand your math isn't mathing here because, he just promoted or his department just brought in $500,000 when we were only projecting to have a $300,000 year." And I said, "Yes, in revenue. What did you lose?" And I said, "His department has the highest turnover rate." I was like, "Do you realize his team of 11, that's not counting him, he makes 12. He has 11 people underneath him. In this year," and it was year 2024. I said, "In that year, he's had 18 people under him. There's only 11. So do the math." And once I broke it out, like, here's the salaries you lost. Here's how long it took you to replace those positions. Here's the time that was lost because now somebody else has to pick up that slack. But now you have two parts being drained because, well, if I'm picking up someone's slack, I'm not giving 100% to my actual tasks. And
you're paying to train the new person, onboard them, and whatever you're paying the new person is probably more than the person that was lost because that's just law of salaries that it's always cheaper to keep someone than it is to hire someone new because odds are think about inflation, basic economics. You get someone at a lower rate as time moves on, their salaries don't always raise with the going rates of inflation or the rates of raises across the board.
yeah, absolutely. And the rule of thumb is usually double that person's salary to replace them. And that's just counting all the lost time. That's counting the lost work. And the most important thing that a lot of people forget, a lot of business owners forget, is the lost knowledge of processes. Because when you have experience in a company, especially as that time goes on, you have a lot of that historical data. You have
that legacy knowledge.
Yep. And when you lose that, that's the big pain point right there.
Yeah. I was in a job interview and I was talking to one of the people and one of the interviewers, and we were talking about running a meeting and people in the meetings. And I said, the person in the back that's got 25 years with the company that's quiet during the meeting is the one that I always want to talk to after the meeting because he's seen these ideas come and go 5 times, same idea, repackaged. And I'll always ask that person, what was wrong? What went wrong? Where and how? Because he or she is going to have opinions.
Absolutely.
And they're going to know, but they're going to sit in the back and be quiet because they're going to say to themselves, I've seen this before. I've seen how it's going to fail. And the last time I spoke up, they didn't want to hear me. So they probably don't want to hear me again.
Yeah. Yeah, they get tired of that.
And that,
I'm not going to fight this.
well, and you just know, you're like, okay, my mom used to always tell me, she worked for the county government, and she used to always tell me, I don't have to like my boss because in a couple of years he's going to change over anyways, and that stuck with me for a long time, that, you don't necessarily, thinking about it in that aspect of, there's always turnover in leadership. There's always turnover everywhere. Sometimes it's best to wait it out because, like you said, you had to point all those things out. But do you think that they would have been figured out on their own maybe in a year, when the numbers start to get run, people start to figure out the profitability ratio isn't where it should be for the income, and eventually it's all found. It's just taken longer to find it than if you had observed it.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely would have eventually been found, but it's one of those, what is higher leadership? What is their culture as well? Because that plays a big part.
Yeah, anytime you can get the customer to agree with you that this is a problem needing solving, then they're gonna be so much easier for you. But if you come in and say this is how much this thing's gonna cost, they're gonna shut you down. They're not gonna hear you. So you have to get them to acknowledge that this is an issue, and it needs to be solved. And then afterwards, then you come back with the bill.
Going right back to the example we used about cutting the hole in the roof of the data center.
Yeah.
If that cost the company $500 to do, and they had pitched it to you for $1 million, you probably would have said, we'll do 500 and call it a day, because you saw the value in that problem being presented, and they could have literally created the storyboard of, this is what can happen if the system locks you out and there's no backup.
Yeah. Yeah. Too often, both PMs and salespeople come in and, they have a solution looking for a problem to solve. And, what we're talking about is come out with the problem. Here's the problem. Get your customer, or whatever the need, whatever the risk, whatever way you want to label it, get them to acknowledge that, yes, that is an issue needing to be addressed. That is really key, and it will change the way because first of all, that executive is going to be appreciative of you listening and understanding of my needs, not your needs. That you took the time to understand what my issues are and what my mission is. And because the only way you're going to be able to convince that person is to get them to say, yeah, that is my area of responsibility. I'm responsible for that. And does need to be done.
Yeah, because when you paint that picture of the parade of horribles of a realistic scenario happening, I've got your attention. And I remember you telling me you could literally create the problem you can paint the picture of the problem, build the parade of horribles, build the realistic scenario of this happening and what downstream effects are. You get the buy-in of your stakeholders, executives, whoever it is. And then you say, oh, and by the way, it's going to cost this much. If you've already got them on the hook for this is a problem, then you might need to do a little bit of negotiation on budget, but odds are you're not getting a whole ton of pushback because I've already sold you on why we need to do this. So if you sit there and say, well, that's too much, I say, is it?
Yeah, I think to your point, Trevor, too many PMs come up with, that we need X amount of dollars to fix this thing. And they're going to be like, oh, you're going to immediately put them back on their heels. They're not going to be listening to anything else you said other than we need X amount of dollars. But if you walk them through and understand that this is the issue I'm dealing with, I want to talk to you about it, and get your input on this. Does this need solving? If you take that approach, you're going to probably say, well, what would be the solution you're talking about? You would say, well, this is X. They're going to say, how much will that cost? You should say, I'll get back to you, and not answer that question at that moment in time.
And then one other important thing that I've noticed about this approach too is it's not just my problem that I'm presenting to you. It's our problem. It's how this becomes our problem if this is not solved, if this change request is not submitted, if this decision is not made. Because as an executive, you're looking at me at the PM going, solve it, go, do what you need to do.
Yeah. So the way that I approach that is if they're saying no to me, if I need something done in, 2 weeks and they're like, dude, I can't touch that for 30 days. Like this is, their line is 30 days. They need something done and mine's 2 weeks. We have a disparity between what we can do or what we need and what they can do. So that's where I use negotiating, right? Where I'm like, dang, he can't, he's telling me right now, or she's telling me right now, she can't do my timeline. Well, what could you do? Could you do 3 weeks? Is that okay? Well, I could do 24 days or what, you get what I'm saying? Like it's, you start to negotiate because if you have credits in their account and they're saying they can't meet something or they're not comfortable meeting something, whatever they gave you they could probably do a little bit more. If the policy says that it's always 30 days, like, no, I need 30 days. That's the policy. They're throwing the policy at you as the bad guy. Well, like I said, sometimes you can find it in between. What could you do? And now you're extracting what they're comfortable doing.
There's that emotional intelligence piece that we were talking about earlier about figuring out, knowing your audience, knowing how that person thinks, how that person ticks a little bit, and then going, okay, well, the policy says that. You're absolutely right. When was the last time you followed the policy for something like this when you needed to get something done?
Yeah. That's a tough one to land because,
I'm using that as an example of reminding them that, you almost want to do the 5 whys with a no to kind of get to what's the root cause of your no, because sometimes it could just be, I don't like you. And you're like, okay, well, I can't help you. I can't help that.
Yeah.
Or it could be, hey, I'm just really busy. I don't have the bandwidth. Oh, okay, well then, do you know someone who can help?
Yeah, I think that's key, right? Like if that's important. If they're at a no and they can't do anything, following up with, do you know anybody that could help? I think that's a great strategy. I think I'm asking them to do something, and if I need them to do it, then it's not a policy problem. It's not a requirements problem. It's a relationship kind of favor without saying it. And they'll usually do, if you've got some tokens, they'll do everything they can, and sometimes they'll say, no, I can only do 30 days. And you're like, oh man, well, okay, well, I appreciate you. And they'll call you back a few days later when their brain is clear and they realize they could do it in 2 weeks. And they'll be like, hey, Craig, you know what, man, I told you 30 days, but I moved some things around after we got off the phone and I can't hit 2 weeks. Victory.
Yeah. And that's, some of those things these are all just great ways to handle the conflict that goes on every day, because if you're a good, don't be a jerk, don't burn bridges. Those are kind of common best practices, but living them is harder than saying it.
Yes.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed those clips from the post-mortem interviews. As I've said earlier, for $5 a month, you can subscribe and get the full-length interviews with all these guests, and stay subscribed to get every guest that comes on. And I can tell you right now, I've got some really good guests already recorded and scheduled to release soon. So stay tuned, stay disgruntled, and be excited about this, because I certainly am.